I'm going over just a few things for those who weren't here yesterday for the opening. I want to quickly just thank my co-chairs, Tarun Khanna and M.R. Rangaswamy, who are right over here, and you'll see them moderating sessions and actively joining and leading the panels today. For those of you who were here yesterday, we sort of divided up our tasks. So I was more doing the moderation yesterday, and Harvard and Diaspora are managing the sessions today, for which I'm really grateful. So I wanted to say it's been a wonderful collaboration. And I particularly wanted to thank all the speakers, the incredible speakers, the panelists, steering committee members, and attendees who are here today. So please grab a breakfast and come down. This session is also on webinar. So I just wanted to say a couple of things about this. You know all of this. The first part, that it's the first Pan-USA multidisciplinary conference. We want to explore themes that are typically discussed in different silos, but particularly we want to have different perspectives. So we saw a lot of that yesterday, and we want to keep that going. And we anticipate white papers from all of the sessions. And I just particularly wanted to note that the conference is off the record. So we would encourage people not to take videotapes, and we're not going to be writing. We haven't invited the media. So it's off the record for media purposes, just because we wanted to focus on a deep exchange of ideas. All sessions are in person except for the 2 Zooms. We have a Zoom going on right now, and we will have another Zoom when Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi joins us at lunch. And so with that, I think we're ready to go. I wanted to say, it may seem like we're keeping everyone on task with the timesheets, but that's really important. Otherwise, we'll just, yesterday we began on time and we ended on time. We want to do the same today because folks have flights to catch. For those of you who are new here today, there are restrooms. If you go down the corridor and to the left, there are restrooms. There are also restrooms upstairs on the next 2 floors. And I just, again, want to thank everyone who made this, the logistics of this possible. I won't repeat all the names. You can see them here. And so now it's really an honor to invite Devesh Kapur to set us off today in a way that combines many of our coming sessions. So Devesh is going to, Devesh is going to talk about the Indian diaspora and its potential role in India's development. So Devesh Kapur has a distinguished background in research and academia. He joined the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, in July 2018. From the University of Pennsylvania, where he was the professor of political science and directed CASI, the Center for the Advanced Study of India, holding the Madan Lal Sobti Chair for the Study of Contemporary India. Prior to his tenure at Penn, he was Associate Professor of Government at UT Austin and Frederick Danziger Associate Professor of Government at Harvard. So Kapur received the Joseph R. Levinson Teaching Prize, an outstanding teaching prize in political science by the American Political Science Association in 2005. So join us. Those of you who followed Devesh, he covers a wide range of topics, and it's an honor to have him here at this conference. So join me in welcoming Devesh.
So what I'm going to be talking to you about is I'll focus on Indians in South America, but put it in the larger context of Indian migration after World War II. The single largest migration in the world in the second half of the 20th century and subsequently has been from India. The single largest movement of talent out from one country has been from India. And there's no country that has been as happy losing its talent as has been India. So What my talk is, I'll just give you a sense of some of the size, trends, and selectivity. My focus will be sort of on the US, and then sort of briefly spend some time on the economic effects on India. I want to argue that the single biggest pernicious effect of migration from India on India is its massively negative effect on Indian higher education and on research. So these are the world's largest migrants. So India, as you can see, is by far the largest. It's not just about overall migration, but if you look at the migration of people with tertiary education, not only is India the largest, but it's also the most rapidly growing. Indians today are the first or second largest migrant group in Australia, Canada, UK, US, and then they're catching up in Ireland, Italy, and New Zealand. They will be in the top 5 in the next few years. This is the Indian American population. It's grown by an order of magnitude in the past 4 decades. Gradually, the share of the US born has been increasing. It's now about 30% of all Indian Americans were born sort of in the US. If you see the overall US population, about 14% were born outside the US. In the case of Indian Americans, 70% were born outside the US. You see a dramatic change in the last decade. This is the change in immigration in the last 12 years, between 2010 and 2022, which is the most recent data we have. The immigrants from Mexico, which are the largest immigrant group in the US, have declined by 1 million. Immigrants from India have increased by 1 million, right? By far, the single largest increase. And as you can see, by far the most educated group of all the largest immigrant groups, if you look at the percentage with the bachelor's degree. If you move on just from migration to sort of naturalization, Indians are now, last year or for 2022, they were the second largest naturalized group, so annually, and that's been increasing as well. So more Indians are coming, more are becoming naturalized. And why this matters, we'll see, is far fewer are going back. So if I take this like for you over the past 12 years, of course, Mexicans are the largest. And you'll see that in the last 5 years, as relations of the US and China have gone down, the naturalization rates for Chinese immigrants has also gone down, and the gap with India has been increasing. So more Chinese are going back to China, fewer Indians are going back to India. These are the largest language groups. Here you can't really separate India, but by the languages of South Asia. What we really see is the single fastest growing language group of Indian immigrants is the Telugu. Andhra has become the single biggest source. The Hyderabad embassy, consulate of the US embassy, issues the largest number of visas in all of Asia now. What has also grown massively is the number of unauthorized immigrants from India in the US. It has been really increasing almost by orders of magnitude, and it is at least 500,000. Obviously, these are estimates. You do not have precise, but these are all official estimates. With that, what we see is dramatic increases in enforcement actions by ICE and the Department of Homeland Security on these are now, unlike the past, where most Indians were unauthorized because they came on an official visa and they stayed on as their visa expired. Now more and more are coming from the southern border, flying to Ecuador and walking or going through the Darien Gap in Panama. We can come to why this might be happening, etc. So this is the demographic characteristics now, right? That's the median age. You can see, and here I've separated from those Indians who were born here versus those Indians who were born in India and have come from there. You can see that, so two things if you want to compare. The average household income of Indian Americans is double that of the US average. That's the last row, which is the median household annual income, right? This graph, I think, really captures it. This is the education of income of all immigrant groups in the US. You can see just how much of an outlier India is. It is by far has the highest income and by far has the highest sort of education. It is a group that is completely unrepresentative of India. Okay, let's be very, very clear. It's completely unrepresentative of India. If the median Indian were to migrate to the US, the India circle would be where Mexico is. In fact, it's sort of even lower, right? Because their education would be way, way less, and then therefore the incomes would be way, way less. So what have been the consequences? Now, usually when we think about consequences, we think of migrants, we think of financial flows, and I won't get into it. Come to the current account through remittances, the capital account. You have non-resident Indian deposits in Indian bank, you have portfolio flows, etc. And the last is foreign direct investment. So estimates which we've done with the Reserve Bank of India that roughly India gets now $125 billion in remittances every year, by far the largest of any country. Of between a fifth and a quarter come from Indian Americans. So that's then the other is NRI deposits in Indian banks, which is about 150 billion. And my rough sense is that we don't have exact numbers, but that about a third of this is from Indian Americans. Portfolio flows, we don't know the nationalities, so we can't sort of estimate that. But what is different, and this is the stark difference between India, the Indian diaspora and the Chinese diaspora. The Chinese diaspora, the money flowing back was not remittances, was not bank deposits, it was foreign direct investment. 60% of all FDI in China after it opened up was from the ethnic Chinese communities of Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. In the Indian case, it was 2 to 3%. Most of Indian FDI from the US has gone into services. It has amplified the bias in India on skill-intensive services, a country which really needed investment in labor-intensive manufacturing. So India, as a result of its diaspora, has become a much more unequal country because of investing in areas that are really run counter to its comparative advantage, which is labor-intensive. So basically, of course, and that's because the Indian diaspora here has not been in manufacturing. The Chinese diaspora made its wealth in manufacturing. So of course, you invest in areas where you have skills. And the skills of the Indian tech sector, most of you know this better than me, Indian IT services have done very, very well. And the diaspora has played an important role in that. But what it has done is to shift resources, not just financial, but talent, away from manufacturing into services. I'll just spend some time on this because this is something that I've been working on. So India is the largest exporter of physicians in the world. 5% of physicians in the US are from India, about 11% in the UK. Massive positive selection. 1 out of 2 of every graduate of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences over the last half century is in the US. And by the way, this is the most expensive public expense training that you can get in India. It's substantially large from the IITs and the IIMs as well. So if you look at immigrant healthcare workers in the US, you'll see that by far the largest number are from India. What is changed in the last 7 to 8 years is a massive increase in nurses coming from India. After the Philippines, India is now the second largest source of nurses, like to the US as well. Now, this is for international students over the past 7 decades. What you can see is that you really see in the past 2 decades in particular a very rapid increase. There's a sad story about Pakistan here, which is pretty obvious. And of course, you see the huge increase from China. But most Indian students coming now are for masters, right? That's the top line. Most of them are coming for masters. If you see for PhDs, which is the bottom line, it's been really flat. If you see the number of PhDs in science and engineering granted in the US, just if you take the last decade, right, from China, it's more than double, like from India. But if you see from India from 2007 to 2021, there's a very slight increase. In fact, if you see here, the top line is China. It sharply increased, but China is also now flattening out because Chinese institutions have become so good that the less need to come, which is what happened with Korea and Taiwan earlier. But in India, that's not happened. And you see it's been completely flat. Now, this is very surprising because the number of people getting an undergrad degree in science and engineering in India is by far the largest in the world and far more than in China, which is a country with much higher level of income, much higher. Basically, the bottom line is most higher education in India today is junk. It is completely junk. It is a massive increase in quantity. India opened 5 new colleges a day, every day, including weekends, in the last 25 years. Now, I ask you the question, who are the faculty there? Even the IITs have a 40% faculty vacancy rate. So forget about these 30,000 colleges that opened up in this last few decades. Let me give you an example, which is AI. So this is from a site. So as you can see, these are various ways, top 2% of talent, blah, blah, blah. That in 2019, 12% had their undergrad degrees in India. That has been declining. Even by 2022, India is just 7%. If you look at the US, the top 20%, just see the change from 2019 to 2022. China has exploded. India has declined. Where do they work? None works in India, right? There is no top talent. If they leave India, nobody goes back. Now, how many minutes do you have? Sorry. Okay. Now, one of the puzzles which I haven't been able to understand is Indian scientists, Indian researchers collaborate much less internationally. Okay, so if you see for India, there's a very small sort of red bar, which is the international collaborations. China, as an authoritarian country, has far more international collaborations. Let me show you more. So this is US international articles with co-authors, the UK and Asian countries. Look how it, as Chinese research took off after the 2000s, just look at US-China collaborative articles. It really took off, right? The bottom line is India. That's the light blue. And it's modestly increased, but at a very, very slow pace. Now, why this matters is interesting is because there's so much incredible Indian talent in the US, and they don't want to seem to collaborate that much with researchers in India. I mean, this is the bottom line, and I'll show you even more. So this is an index in which you look at relative international collaboration. In other words, your researchers collaborate with countries around the world relative to your how much you collaborate with everyone else. How much do you collaborate with scientists in the US, right? What is interesting with India, which is what I've circled over there, is that it has declined from 96 to 2020, the past cohort. Given how many more people are coming to the US, one should have seen, and how much higher education has exploded in India, one should have seen a huge increase. But it's the opposite. And I don't have a good answer like for you. Now, Indian science itself, actually, it's not that it's not been improving. This is the share of the top 1% most cited articles. And there are these different indexes. This is just one source. And you can really see China's rise. China crosses India around 2010. And it's not that Indian science has not been, it's that it's been stagnant. But one thing we do see, and this is the stay rates of doctoral graduates in the US from 2000. I haven't been able to get data. It's not been up. This is, by the way, all this data is from the National Science Foundation. And you can see only 6% of all Indians who come to do a PhD in the US go back. 94% stay, right? And the 94 and those who come to the US are really among the best and brightest. They are at the upper tail of the distribution of talent from India. So I don't want to say that India loses 94% of its best and brightest. That's obviously a much higher number. But it just shows you how much of this talent flows out and does not flow back. Now, there are other areas you can see this. This is immigrant founders of billion-dollar startups. And as you can see, by far, the largest is immigrants from India. About 1/5 of all such startups, of all immigrants. The number of startups, billion-dollar startups in India, by Indians in India is the same as by Indian immigrants in the US, which is a population that is 400 times more in India than here. But the number of these firms is same. If I show you, this is a little complex, but it's basically about inventions and inventors, and this data has been updated. But you basically see that if you think of innovation in patent filings, what you see is this negative thing that if you see at the very end, here is the US, and that's the net contribution of immigrants to the US to patent filings in the US. And in India, it's negative because most patent filings by Indians are those who've left India rather than those who are in India. So the bottom line, what I want to emphasize, yes, there have been substantial flows, financial flows from the Indian American diaspora to India. It's about 1% of GDP. That's our estimates. It has had very large positive effects on India's IT sector. It has amplified skill service sector bias in India. suck talent and resources from labor-intensive manufacturing. The human capital flight from India has had massively negative effects on research and innovation, and I don't even want to talk about its much more difficult but very likely effects on India's politics. And I have zero doubt that its most negative effects has been on Indian higher education. When a country loses its best and brightest, not over years, not over decades, but now over half a century, it's bound to have negative effects. Thank you.
Let's gather questions. And then Devesh could pick maybe one or two that he wants to answer, and then we'll transition over to the next session. There's a lot to talk, clearly, but we're also catching up on the 15 minutes that we lost due to the shuttle. So I'm going to ask folks just to raise their hands, and if one of us could run the microphone, we'll just listen to the questions. So anyone who has questions, please raise your hands, and I'm sure there's a lot.
Thank you. Great talk. I'm trying to speculate on why collaborations between Indian scientists in the US and Indians back home is stagnant. Could it be that the number of PhD graduates has stayed stagnant, and that's why we don't see that much collaboration? That's a
Hi Devesh, Sanjeev from Diaspora. Your presentation focuses on America. Are there similar numbers and data available for other countries like UK, Australia, Singapore, etc.? Thank you.
I'm Priya Natarajan. That's a very enlightening presentation. It was great to see the data. I was curious whether you have information on the socioeconomic backgrounds of the immigrants who came from India over time, because I suspect there has been a real change. And the reason I say that is maybe India lost a lot of the elites earlier on, not necessarily the brightest and the best.
I have more a comment rather than a question, which is, as a faculty member in engineering school here, what I find is Indian students do very good theory and they are completely absent in experimental science.
Good morning. Very eye-opener, the data what you have shown. 2 points I want to mention is, one, when you say that Indian scientists or researchers are not collaborating with international, maybe it lies in the data what you mentioned is the quality of higher education, what you talked about. But more importantly, the quality has reduced because there is no emphasis on the K to 12 or school education. The foundation levels are so bad that, because of that actually is going up in higher education. And in terms of printing degrees, beyond that, there is no learning is happening, is what I feel. Thank you very much.
Hi there, this is Sharu Nair, and I'm a retired faculty. I had a quick question. I was seeing a lot of correlations between all the slides that you've done. And one of them was this lack of collaboration amongst the group. And I was curious to know how it correlated with when people got naturalized. Because I think there's a cycle of kind of settling in, being comfortable and interacting. And I was just broadly later on curious to know what correlations you might have drawn amongst, and to hear your thoughts on the metadata. Thanks.
We're taking one last question. I know there are many questions, but let's take a question from a different perspective.
Thank you. My name is Ching Yuan. I'm a retired historian. What I was struck in terms of the comparison of the Chinese and Indian diaspora is the prominence of Indians in politics. I'm referring, of course, to the number of congressmen, congresswomen, and the vice president in this country, the prime minister in Great Britain, number of Indian in the Canadian government. So we're very curious of the propensity of the Indians in the politics of these countries. Thank you. You didn't discuss this question, but I think it's very important and somewhat controversial.
So sorry, I won't be able to answer all your questions, but just the relative paucity of, and I think this is a group that I'm sure thinks about this. I think there's no doubt that having more scientific collaborations, the US and India, not just good for the political partnership between the two countries, but would strongly raise the standards of research in India itself. And I think the act of research, of standards, of the pedagogy that occurs while doing research, all of those can only have strong positive effects in India. Now, why has it not happened more? In the past, you could have said, look, resources on the Indian side are very limited. That's no longer the case. Yes, they still are limited, of course, compared to here. But, there has been a broad increase in resources. There are now many more. Of course, there are awful lot of terrible private institutions. But there is now a growing small number of private institutions which have more flexibility and so on. Now, the simplest and crudest answer that I could give you is researchers want to collaborate with people who are themselves good in research. That's the bottom line. Talent attracts the talent. Want to work with other good people who will up our game just as we will up their game. And if you don't feel that is there in the counterparty, you go elsewhere. Because almost all of you here have massive number of options. There's no compulsion to go and do this in India, unless you're really driven by other broader motivations. The second is, of course, and this I can say after having worked for decades on Indian higher education. No political party in India has ever really understands higher education, period. Only way they think about higher education is reservations, or when I was reviewing the 5-year plan before 5-year plans, the 5-year plan on higher education, if you had taken out higher education and colleges and put fertilizers and urea, it would have been a plan for fertilizers. So much inputs, and this is the output. That's it. That is the level of mechanical thinking that would go into that. Now, I think, and this is related to tangentially to Priya's thing, there's no doubt there is massive social mobility occurring in India. The base is, I've tried to put across something that India ought to have done much better, and it used to, but it has really declined, is mathematics and statistics, because that's not a capital intensive field. You don't need a good English accent to do that research, right? But seeing the base expand, I think these are areas where fruitfully researchers from here can really help improve as well. And we know that math and stats are now at the base of so much of what is happening in tech. I think I've run out of time. I'll stop.
Wonderful round of applause. And as we saw yesterday, there are lots of things to park for future sessions. So we may not have time. So one outcome of all of our discussions yesterday was we're going to create Google Docs. So please, when you go back from this conference, don't lose the momentum. And with some draft white paper remarks, even from the note takers and from the video, everything is being recorded. But then we're going to invite people to add more. So this is not your last chance to offer comments. But I did want to say that, Devesh, thank you so much, because when he and I spoke, we actually said this sets up many things. It sets up the innovation panel. It sets up the education panel with a different kind of, with a database framing. So let's park some of these questions on why the collaborations aren't happening. Maybe share more experiences over lunchtime. And so I'm going to have the pleasure of handing this off to my co-chair, Tarun. So thanks, Tarun, to take on the next session. And thank you again, Devesh. Thanks.